Happy New Year! Welcome to 2023. 在新的一年，带给主管第一个单元就是如何让我们的写作跟说话能够更流畅。今天来分享一些简单的小技巧，可以让大家使用在生活以及工作当中。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. It's a new year for new ideas. But as you go out there and share your plans and goals for the year, it's often important to mark out the specific steps rather than give people a jumbled mess of your ideas and hope that they can take action on it in the new year. So to start you off, we want to talk about the beauty of discourse markers. It sounds fancy, but in reality, it's just a core of business writing for clarity. Basically, a way to flag or emphasize specific ideas and specific steps.
我相信很多人就听到 discourse marker 就心中可能会想说什么是 discourse marker， 但其实大部分的人都知道 discourse marker， 尤其是比如说在讲 steps sequence， 或者可能也在讲explaining reason， 那这一些都是我们所谓的 discourse marker， 所以有一些是蛮基本我们平常就可能会在用的。那今天呢，希望不只带给大家比较一些 foundation 的一些知识，我们也能够再提供更实用的 discourse marker。
As Sherry said, we want to move beyond the basics that most people use, like sequences first, second, third, or moreover, in addition to add information, and deep dive into a few more of the complicated discourse markers that you may not think about a lot, but can be really powerful in your writing or in your speech. The first one we want to jump into is compare and contrast. This is especially important if we're looking into the New Year's and we want to say, okay, before this was our goal or before this was our focus, and here's what we learned and want to go into the next thing. Making comparison and contrasting to previous year's plans is always important.
Here are the few that you guys probably are using already. For example, on the other hand, yet, however, 这一些都是所谓的 compare and contrast.
So a few things that you can bring into your vocabulary or into your usage bank would be phrases like in spite of. In spite of is a great phrase in order to bring people around to a different way of thinking. So 2022, I think, was a pretty difficult year for a lot of businesses. So you may say something like, in spite of the recent downturn, we're actually going to look forward with hope, or we're going to build a very aggressive plan. So you're showing that in spite of or despite something that happened last year, it's not worth giving up. You can think in a more positive manner.
Another one that you can use is regardless or irregardless. 那 regardless 其实跟刚刚 Nick 所讲的 in spite of or despite 其实非常类似嘛。So regardless of a very difficult year in 2022, we wanted to make it big in 2023. So 一样也是在陈述这种 compare and contrast.
Now there's an interesting thing with regardless and irregardless. They actually mean exactly the same thing. The only time that you hear irregardless is if you want to make a much more negative connotation or a much more negative focus on what you want to say. So, for example, in Sherry's last sentence, she said, regardless of the last year, we want to make the next year hopeful. But if you want to use the term irregardless, your second thing is usually the more negative of the two. So, irregardless of your feelings on the matter, it's important for us to push forward, which means I'm discounting or I'm not really caring about what you think. But if I said, regardless of your feelings, it's important to move forward, I may consider it more in terms of even though this is a very emotional thing, I think there's positive things going forward. So that's just a fun contrast between these two words.
Now the next one, talking about results, 也就是结果。那有一些大家平常也会用到的，比如说像 for this reason, hence, thus, as a result, 这一些都是我们平常可能会听到以及会用到的一些片语。
So things that you can use instead of the basics that Sherry just mentioned or the tried and true because of are things like consequently or accordingly. These words just feel a little bit more powerful. Because seems just like a natural progression. But when you use terms like consequently or accordingly, is you're really calling out that whatever comes next is a big shift from what I talked about before. So if I laid out certain milestones or markers that we hit before, then consequently, it's going to have very significant actions. We talked about in the redundant episode that you cannot use certain words over and over again or they lose meaning. Consequently and accordingly are two words that you should use in very specific situations to call something out. It's not just an easy switch from because of. But when you use these properly, it does bring people's attention to the next part of your sentence.
所以刚刚Nick所讲的 consequently 跟 accordingly 他们是蛮能够让这个语气加强的这个片语或这个单字，但是呢请大家绝对要小心哦，就是我们不要太常去用它，因为当你太常去用它的话，它的那个意思跟这种加强的语气它可能就会不见了。 So again, use it when you absolutely have to, and I really like the word consequently because the word consequence, it just feels so strong.
Right, consequently or in consequence, which is a very formal way of doing it. But when used sparingly, it brings a lot of emphasis to be like, no, there's something that's going to happen. Or because of past actions, we have to really consider the next thing. This really does separate it from that phrase like because of. So our next discourse marker is expressing a condition. Things that people usually know as if. It's the basic way to think about it. If A, then B. But you also have things like as long as or so long as. As long as the economy continues going in a downward spiral, we're going to have to do whatever thing.
Or as long as I keep taking medicine, my voice will be back.
Another way to say that would be like, provided you keep taking medicine, you'll return to good health.
So another one that we could use is assuming that or given that. But I have to ask Nick, I feel like assuming that, because the word assume, I feel like it's a little bit different.
It's more like a hypothesis. So, for example, if you want to make certain estimations or guesses about the future, this would be a great phrase to show, again, conditions. Like, assuming that A, B, and C are true, we need to take this action, right? So you may actually use that in different ways. Be like, assuming A, B, and C, we take action Z. Assuming D, E, F, we take action X. So you're actually separating out specifically using this kind of discourse marker, this kind of phrase. There's another phrase similar, given that, which you talked about. But assuming that and given that would be the separation of assuming that is I'm making a little bit more of a guess or a hypothesis. Given that would be I'm stating facts. So given that fact 1, fact 2, fact 3, this is the action we need to take.
So assuming that, assume 因为它就是一个假设嘛，假设这件事情是真的。但是 given that 它其实后面陈述就是现在的这个事实 right, they're facts. 所以它其实两者有点点少少的不同，但是它们都可以用来作为 expressing a condition.
We hope that you found it useful to look at discourse markers as a way to talk about your New Year's plans or your strategy for the coming quarters. These are great ways to bring emphasis to certain parts of your speech and also to create clarity when you're giving a lot of information in a plan. If you have any of your favorite discourse markers, be sure to join us in the new year on any of our social media, Executive Plus on Facebook or Communication R&D on Instagram. And if you would like to join a few thousand other wonderful listeners who get our weekly newsletter with quick tips like this, be sure to look at the sign up link below. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.